The Poets coach stepped out of the dugout and immediately signaled for a pitching change. He had seen enough. With the Vols' rally gaining strength and the lead reduced to a single run, he decided to bring in his best pitcher, the ace the Poets trusted to shut the rally down. The young pitcher jogged in from the bullpen while the Poets gathered around the mound. Their coach spoke briefly, trying to settle them before returning to the dugout.
"We still have the lead,"
the coach reminded them.
"There are 2 outs. Get this last batter, and we'll be back in our dugout."
As the home plate umpire, I remained behind the plate while the new pitcher threw 2 of his 8 warm-up pitches to the catcher. His fastball had good speed, and his breaking ball moved sharply across the plate. Under normal circumstances, he was exactly the pitcher the Poets wanted on the mound. However, these were no longer normal circumstances. I had umpired the Vols in previous games, and I understood what could happen once they captured the momentum. Their hitters became more patient, their dugout grew louder, and every player seemed to feed off the confidence of the player before him. As I watched the Poets' ace complete his warm-up pitches, a troubling thought entered my mind. Their ace might be good, I silently told myself, but I don't believe he is good enough to stop these hitters now. The pitcher completed his final warm-up toss, and the catcher threw the ball back to the pitcher. The infielders slowly walked to the mound. Before the next batter stepped into the batter's box, I reached into my ball bag, removed my plate brush, and swept the dirt away from home plate. It was something I had done countless times, but this time, when I raised my head, I noticed the expression in the catcher's eyes. He looked disappointed. The catcher was crouched behind the plate, with his mask resting above his forehead, but his eyes told the story. The confidence he had displayed earlier had faded. It was almost as though he were still replaying the dropped fly ball, the line drive double, the walk, and the 3-run homer in his mind. I turned slightly and studied the rest of the Poets' defense. The first baseman stood with his hands resting on his knees, but his shoulders sad. The second baseman stared toward the ground and kicked at the dirt with the toe of his cleat. The shortstop, who had been talking and encouraging his teammates throughout the game, had become unusually quiet. In left field, the young player who had dropped the fly ball stood almost motionless, carrying the weight of that mistake by himself. The Poets were still leading 6-5. Their best pitcher was on the mound, and there were already 2 outs in the top of the 6th inning. They needed only 1 more out to end the rally and preserve their lead. Yet their body language suggested that they were the team trailing on the scoreboard. Earlier in the game, their confidence had filled the stadium. They had played with energy, trusted one another, and believed they could defeat a team that nearly everyone expected to beat them. Now it looked as though someone had stuck a pin into that confidence. The air had slowly escaped from their balloon, and with it went the excitement and determination they had shown during the first 5 innings. The Vols had not taken the lead, but they had already succeeded in making the Poets doubt themselves. Standing behind home plate, I realized that the most important battle was no longer taking place between the pitcher and the next batter. Instead, it was taking place inside the minds of those young Poets. And just as I had feared, the momentum continued carrying the Vols forward. The next batter stepped into the box and lined a base hit into the outfield. The batter behind him followed with another single, placing 2 runners on base and giving the Vols another opportunity to take control of the game. The noise from their dugout grew louder. Their players pressed against the fence, clapping and shouting encouragement. The Vols fans were on their feet, sensing that the comeback was almost complete. The next batter walked toward the plate, carrying the confidence of a player who believed the pitcher was already in trouble. He stepped into the box, dug his back foot into the dirt, and waited for the pitch. The count moved to 1 ball and 1 strike. The Poets' ace stood on the mound and looked toward his catcher for the sign. He came set, lifted his leg, and delivered the next pitch. The batter swung. The crack of the bat echoed through the stadium as the ball climbed high into the air toward center field. The center fielder immediately turned and raced toward the wall, but the ball continued carrying over his head. He reached the warning track, slowed his steps, and looked upward as the baseball sailed over the center field wall. It was another 3-run home run. The 2 runners ahead of the batter crossed home plate, and the hitter followed them around the bases. With one swing, the Vols had erased the Poets' lead and moved ahead, 8-6. Their dugout erupted in celebration. Players crowded around home plate, waiting to greet the home run hitter, while the Vols fans cheered so loudly that their voices seemed to shake the stadium. As the batter completed his trip around the bases, I looked across the field at the Poets. Every infielder had his head lowered. The outfielders stood silently in the grass, staring toward the ground. The excitement they had shown earlier was gone, replaced by disappointment and disbelief. They looked as though they had given up. The Vols had not simply taken the lead on the scoreboard. They had taken away the Poets' confidence, and the young players seemed unable to understand how a game they had controlled for so long had slipped from their hands so quickly. The next Vols batter stepped into the box and hit a ground ball toward third base. The Poets' third baseman moved to his left, fielded the ball cleanly, and threw across the diamond. The first baseman caught the throw before the runner reached the bag. "Out!" the other umpire called. The inning was finally over, but the damage had been done. The Vols had scored 7 runs with 2 outs and turned a 6-1 deficit into an 8-6 lead. As the Poets slowly walked toward their dugout, I thought about how quickly their confidence had disappeared. They had been 1 out away from carrying a 5-run lead into the final inning, but one mistake had opened the door, and adversity had tested everything they believed about themselves. That moment reminded me of a lesson that reaches far beyond a baseball field. When the going gets tough, that's when you discover what you are made of. It is easy to believe when everything is working in your favor. The real test comes when the momentum changes, your confidence begins to fade, and the outcome you expected suddenly appears beyond your reach. In the bottom half of the 6th inning, the Vols made a pitching change of their own. They brought their ace to the mound and trusted him to protect their 8-6 lead through the final 2 innings. The Poets could not have asked for a better part of their lineup to come to the plate. Their 3rd, 4th, and 5th hitters were due up, and those 3 young men had done most of the damage earlier in the game. They had collected the majority of the Poets' hits and had driven in all 6 of their runs. If anyone could restore the confidence of the Poets, it was those 3 batters. The first hitter stepped into the batter's box, but the Vols ace immediately established control. He worked quickly, kept the ball low, and forced the batter to hit a routine ground ball toward shortstop. The shortstop moved in front of it, fielded it cleanly, and threw the ball to first base. "Out!" the other umpire called. The next batter met the same fate. He hit another ground ball toward shortstop, and the Vols recorded the 2nd out without difficulty. The Poets' 5th hitter represented their final chance to keep the inning alive. He had already delivered earlier in the game, but this time he could not repeat that success. He also rolled a ground ball toward the shortstop. The shortstop gathered it, planted his feet, and completed his 3rd putout of the inning. "Out!" the other umpire called again. All 3 of the Poets' most productive hitters had grounded out to the same defensive player. The 6th inning was over, and the Vols ace had retired the heart of the Poets' lineup without allowing a runner to reach base. As the game entered the 7th and final inning, the Vols appeared much more comfortable with their 8-6 lead. They had survived the Poets' best hitters, and their confidence had returned to the level they had displayed before the game began. The Poets managed to record 3 outs against the first 4 Vols batters in the top of the 7th. No additional runs crossed the plate, but the Vols did not appear concerned. They believed the 2-run lead was more than enough for their ace to protect. Their players returned to the dugout smiling and congratulating one another. Some of them behaved as though the final 3 outs were little more than a formality. They had won 18 games that season, and they fully expected this game to become their 19th victory. As the Poets prepared to bat in the bottom of the 7th, I examined the lineup card and saw that their 6th, 7th, and 8th hitters were scheduled to come to the plate. The situation appeared discouraging. Those 3 hitters had struggled throughout the game. Each one had struck out during his previous 2 trips to the plate. Now they had to face the Vols' best pitcher, with their team trailing by 2 runs, and their season's most difficult comeback resting on their shoulders. Standing behind home plate, I could feel the game slipping away from the Poets. Unless something unexpected happened, this would be their final inning. The Poets' 6th hitter picked up his bat and walked slowly toward the plate. Across the field, the Vols fans began clapping in unison. The rhythmic sound spread through their section of the stadium as they rose to support their pitcher. Their faces were filled with happiness and anticipation. Their team held a 2-run lead. The game had reached its final inning, and their ace stood on the mound. The Vols needed only 3 more outs. The Poets, however, needed something they had not received from the bottom of their lineup all afternoon. They needed someone to believe they could do it. As the Vols fans continued clapping in unison, the first Poets batter in the bottom of the 7th inning walked toward home plate. He stepped into the batter's box, looked toward third base for the sign, and prepared to face the Vols' ace. On the first pitch, he surprised everyone. Instead of swinging away, the batter turned and placed a bunt perfectly down the third base line. The ball rolled slowly across the grass as the pitcher rushed from the mound to field it. By the time the pitcher picked up the baseball, he realized the runner was already too close to first base. He started his throwing motion, but then, wisely, held on to the ball rather than risk throwing it away. The Poets had their leadoff runner safely aboard. Their bench immediately came alive. Players jumped to their feet and crowded against the dugout fence, clapping and shouting encouragement. The Poets fans also rose from their seats, cheering as though the bunt had breathed new life into the entire ballpark. "Let's go, Poets!" their fans shouted. "We're still in this game!" The Vols fans responded by clapping even louder. Both sides were now on their feet, filling the stadium with competing cheers. The Poets were still trailing 8-6, but the tying run was about to come to the plate with nobody out. Before the next batter entered the batter's box, the third base coach requested time.
Time.
Coach Jonathan Colvin called. I raised both hands. "Time is granted," I announced. Coach Colvin, whom everyone called Coach Coe, motioned for the batter to join him near the third base line. The two leaned toward each other as Coach Coe began explaining the strategy he wanted to use. Normally, an umpire would move away and give the coach and player room to speak privately. I could have walked to the other side of home plate and waited for their conversation to end. However, my curiosity got the best of me. So, instead of moving to the opposite side, I remained near the third base batter's box, close enough to hear their discussion. I wanted to know what Coach Coe planned to do with a runner on first base, nobody out, and his team trailing by 2 runs in the final inning. You know, people often say, curiosity killed the cat. Well, I've always looked at it differently. See, my curiosity was about to clarify exactly what this cat was curious about, I later joked. I am not going to pretend that I did not care about the strategy Coach Coe was preparing to use. At that moment, I wanted to hear every word. The game was balanced on the edge of a single decision, and Coach Coe was about to reveal whether he intended to play it safe or ask another struggling young batter to do something nobody in the stadium expected.